It's the Acting Income Podcast with Ben Houck, episode 38. The return to work, the coronavirus, SAG-AFTRA, and some uncommon sense about actors' rights and safety.
It's the Acting Income Podcast with Ben Houck. Turn your passion into income, Ben will show you how. With all the resources that you need to make it as an actor in an expensive city. To stay balanced and make money, you really can't go wrong with actingincome.com.
Welcome to the Acting Income Podcast. I'm Ben Houck, your host of the podcast on acting, making money, and all its ramifications. It's been a while, so if you're still a subscriber, thank you for sticking around. The podcast is still here, though with an unpredictable schedule, mostly because I get pretty busy. But I want to put together the most thought out and researched episodes that I can. So, thanks for downloading this episode. If you've just found this podcast and haven't subscribed yet, pull up the Acting Income Podcast on your favorite podcasts app and click the subscribe button. You'll get episodes the moment they're released. This is episode 38, titled The Return to Work, the Coronavirus, SAG-AFTRA, and some uncommon sense about actors' rights and safety. You can pull up the show notes for this episode with all the links referenced in the show, plus a place to comment at actingincome.com/episode 38. And now, before we get started, a word from our sponsor for this episode, Stand-In Central. As editor of Stand-In Central, I've been putting out weekly blog posts about the little-known work of stand-ins. Well, it's a pandemic right now, and there hasn't been much need to talk about stand-ins. But that's not an excuse. That's actually an alarm. In fact, I've been keeping up writing about stand-ins during the coronavirus pandemic, mostly covering the coronavirus from the vantage of stand-ins, because I haven't heard anyone else do so, and we exist. So, if you're a stand-in, or if you're someone who hires stand-ins, or collectively bargains for stand-ins, check out the coronavirus blog posts on standincentral.com/coronavirus. They're free. Again, that's standincentral.com/coronavirus. Thank you. During a pandemic, when you think of an essential worker, what do you think of? The first thing that comes to my mind is nurses, then doctors. Then there are support services like fire departments, police officers, sanitation comes somewhere around there. Then there are those who provide food, who may not be essential every moment of every day, but for an extended period of time, they become essential. So I think of grocery store employees, drugstore employees, pharmacists. Then I think of the suppliers for the businesses, the companies that make products that go on the shelves. A number of those are arguably essential too. So that also means the truck drivers who transport the products, the people who load the trucks, the people who staff the warehouses, the security at these warehouses, the people who take in orders for supplies. And then there are the manufacturers of the supplies, who have to wrangle together all of the various ingredients and parts from others to fulfill the orders they get, which might make them essential too. I start to see how expansive essential service is, because the frontline, first-of-mind people must be able to do their jobs, and people gotta eat, stay healthy, and stay alive, and they all depend on special others to do their jobs. But do you know what doesn't come to mind? Actors. Actors don't come to mind as essential workers during a pandemic. They don't come to mind as people who need to do their jobs and risk their lives. I can't think of a single instance of an actor who by some reasonable obligation must risk his or her life because of a demand for acting work. Now, you might be able to think of an instance or two, but that wouldn't invalidate my point that on the whole, and nearly in total, actors are not essential workers. There is no essential demand for actors to go to work and do their jobs during a pandemic, such as the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. By extension, there is nothing absolutely essential about the entertainment industry. You might beg to differ. You might say that during the pandemic, we need new visual entertainment piped over a screen. And that new visual entertainment must be fresh and timely. It can't be old visual entertainment or even slightly expired. Without new visual entertainment piped over a screen, our mental health will most certainly decline and we will die. It's obviously absurd to argue that point. How many years now has humanity produced visual entertainment that we have never consumed before, that is readily stored on various media and available over various platforms? How many TV shows produced in the near and distant past haven't we seen yet? How many movies have we missed that are now streamable or are on DVD? How many YouTube videos are there? Have you seen all that Vimeo has to offer? Do we really need new visual entertainment piped over a screen when there is such a backlog from which we could pull? And there are obviously other forms of entertainment out there. Conversation, books, puzzles, games, apps, exercise. I could go on. And some of those forms of entertainment involve actors. Audiobooks come to mind. Radio plays are another. Podcasts. I can't stop counting just how many forms of entertainment are out there that can bide our time when we desperately need entertainment and when we don't have new visual entertainment piped over a screen. Why do I make this point? As someone who is an actor, I say this because there is common sense out there, or what I will call in scare quotes, common sense, that actors cannot work while wearing personal protective equipment, or PPE, by which I mean face masks, namely, but other recommended gear to protect the person wearing it from getting infected or maybe infecting others. So there is, quote, common sense out there that actors cannot work while wearing PPE. A variation of that common sense is that actors cannot work while always wearing PPE, that you can't shoot actors right now and have them always wearing PPE while on camera. I call this, quote, common sense because it is a position that makes sense and is common. It seems to make a lot of sense to a lot of people that actors can't wear PPE when they're acting. But because it is common sense, does not mean that the common sense is empirically true or economically true. In fact, a claim like actors cannot always utilize personal protective equipment when they work needs to be tested before it should be promoted. Because if the claim is not tested, then there is no data to support the claim. And if there is no data to support the claim that actors cannot always wear PPE, then it is potentially a dangerous claim to promote. Why? Because listen to it. It facilitates a belief that actors cannot always utilize PPE when they work. Then, what follows that belief is that actors are not always wearing PPE when they work. They take it off sometimes for their work. And what is potentiated when they are working without PPE is that actors are now working under dangerous and hazardous conditions, working in that way for reasons that aren't exactly clear, other than some suspicious, unfounded claim that actors can't work while always wearing PPE. If other crew members are always required to wear PPE, but actors are not, this means the actors are decidedly working in a hazardous environment. Because, look around at the crew. Without always wearing PPE, not only do the actors make themselves at risk, but they also make the crew at a greater risk. If doctors and nurses were all wearing PPE around each other, that's one thing. But immediately, when they step in to work with a patient suspected of having COVID-19, their risk notably increases. The same for crew when actors don't have masks. Except crew probably won't be wearing the same level of PPE that doctors and nurses are wearing, and the working actor may not visibly have contracted SARS-CoV-2, so it's arguably more risky to be on a set during a pandemic than in an ICU. Who believes that actors can't work while always wearing PPE? SAG-AFTRA National President Gabrielle Carteris has made the claim that actors can't always wear PPE when they work. She made the claim first during a press conference on May 6, 2020. She then repeated the claim verbatim during a webinar mainly to SAG-AFTRA members on May 12, 2020. Here's what she said.
We were one of the first to be hit by the virus, and unfortunately, we may actually be among the last to come back, simply because we work in high numbers and very close proximity where PPE cannot always be utilized. And that's a painful reality for us.
Surely, SAG-AFTRA President Gabrielle Carteris sounds sensitive and compassionate to actors, even reasonable, when she says that actors can't always wear PPE. She is speaking what is arguably common sense that many others, maybe you, would be inclined to echo. She even calls it a painful reality, as if there is no other reality than actors cannot always wear PPE. But is it correct for a union president of around 160,000 members and non-members to say actors cannot always utilize PPE when they work? Well, when you put President Carteris' statement next to other statements by SAG-AFTRA, it is probably improper for her to say that actors can't always utilize PPE. I say this because SAG-AFTRA, coincidentally, is creating safety and risk mitigation protocols in the return to work, protocols that they announced will be informed by data. SAG-AFTRA National Executive Director David White exclusively told Deadline for an article published on March 30th, 2020, that, quote, "We have to keep monitoring reliable data about the spread of the outbreak across our country." SAG-AFTRA then, on May 13th, 2020, published a press release that was picked up by a number of entertainment industry trades, saying that it is working with Dr. Jonathan E. Fielding, who was a Los Angeles public health director for quite a number of years. The press release drives home SAG-AFTRA's interest in data, saying this: "Fielding's work with the union will begin immediately, starting with a thorough evaluation of data available from leading public health organizations such as the CDC, World Health Organization, and municipal public health agencies, and from labor relations and industrial sanitation and safety representatives of studios, networks, and industry-related organizations around the world. This data-based assessment will inform the union's recommendations, which will in turn be brought to our labor allies, sister unions, and global entertainment and media industry employers for discussion, input, and alignment on minimum uniform safety standards." So, if data is the basis for SAG-AFTRA, and if data is the union's prime interest, then data should drive the policies that SAG-AFTRA eventually recommends to labor allies, sister unions, and global entertainment and media industry employers in the development of uniform safety standards. Otherwise, if SAG-AFTRA gives to them policies that are not informed by data, and labor allies, sister unions, and global entertainment and media industry employers adopt those kinds of ill-formed policies, what that probably means is that actors are expected not just by employers, but also SAG-AFTRA to work without PPE at all times, and without a reasonable, data-based assessment to inform that kind of expectation of actors. SAG-AFTRA should only promote a statement like, "Actors cannot always utilize PPE," if its basis is in data. Not just because I say so, but because that appears to be SAG-AFTRA's expressed value. But no such data would support that claim, that actors can't always wear PPE when they're working. So saying actors can't always utilize PPE when they're working is not consistent with the object of creating data-driven protocols in the return to work. In that same May 13th, 2020 press release that announces Dr. Jonathan E. Fielding is assisting SAG-AFTRA, President Gabrielle Carteris and Executive Director David White express the regard the union has for actor safety. Carteris says, "We are working tirelessly to establish a structure that will allow our members to safely return to work." White follows by saying, "Our goal is to create a comprehensive and practical framework for returning safely to work." With that value of safety underscored, one might reasonably think that SAG-AFTRA would avoid saying things like, "Actors cannot always utilize PPE," not just because of the lack of data to support it, but also because saying its opposite, that actors can always wear PPE, appears to be aligned squarely with safety, as well as backed by data. It is this latter, opposite idea that I wish to promote in this podcast episode. Actors can always utilize PPE when they return to work. I wish to promote that it is safer to assume that actors can always utilize PPE when they're working. I also wish to promote that it is dangerous to say that actors cannot always utilize PPE when they are working. When you expressly believe as a labor organization that actors can't always wear PPE during a pandemic, you underwrite employers asking actors to go without PPE, and thus you promote unsafe work conditions for actors. But alternately, when you expressly believe as a labor organization that actors can always utilize PPE when they're working, you spark a healthy problem for employers to solve. You spark creativity. You may even spark innovation, all aimed at the assurance that actors are safe when they are working during a pandemic, rather than have to risk their lives and risk the safety of those on the crew. The current pandemic has shown that the entertainment industry has plenty of creativity and innovation go around, so it should have no issue coming up with creative solutions if it is required by SAG-AFTRA or even some governmental body that during a pandemic, actors must always be wearing PPE. COVID-19 has done a number on film production and dramatic television. But production of late-night variety shows has largely continued. Many of these shows used to tape before a live studio audience. When the pandemic really struck, quickly live studio audiences were dashed. Sam B's show, Frontal, went from live studio audience to audience of writers and other staff spaced out before the CBS studio in which it taped was abruptly shut down because of coronavirus. Without a studio, B's show moved locations to a place in the woods. Operating the camera was her husband. This was how Frontal adapted to the firm reality and creative challenges that the production no longer had a studio, no longer had a live audience, no longer had a crew. Stephen Colbert's show, The Late Show, with a large theater-size audience and live band, also responded. Colbert started shooting from his home. Jimmy Fallon, Trevor Noah, Bill Maher, and others scaled down their productions to what seemed like home productions without pedestal cameras or jibs. Saturday Night Live put together 3 more shows with its large cast spread out geographically around the United States, employing different media formats that worked under those constraints to put together their shows. While I don't know the exact technology used to produce the shows, practically speaking, it looks as if SNL employed anywhere from Zoom teleconference software to iPhones and other similarly downscale technology to produce a number of its sketches and shows despite the creative constraints geographic distance of its cast created. In fact, the pandemic and the constraints it brought meant there was ample room for fresh material. So those shows featured sketches satirizing the new technological constraints many of us also faced in this surprising new time. It's not as if SNL no longer had anything to write about or do because of actors and PPE and being far apart and all that. This is to say that before the pandemic, you probably could have gone to any of these shows and pitched the idea that, you know what, Sam B? You know what, Stephen Colbert? You know what, SNL? You should do your future shows basically over webcam from your home. Downscale is in. You should ditch live studio audiences laughing at your fresh material. You should ditch the technology that allows you to do innovative things within a studio. You should ditch the camera operators and sound people and graphic designers and other staff and crew who work for you and are integral to your live show successes. No, you should do your shows over webcam from your living rooms or from the woods. And you can have someone who lives with you do camera and lighting. Amazing, right? Of course, I have no data to back this, but I'm pretty sure if I pitched that idea before the pandemic, or even besides the pandemic, the idea would have been shot down by every producer on every production, maybe on the face of the earth. But things changed, and the demands of the pandemic and worker health and logistics became apparent. And what happened? The late-night variety shows moved forward. They started out with lower-tech solutions, and as they figured out this new reality and its constraints, they asked themselves, how could they improve on their work? And they did. They worked within the creative constraints, rather than just flouting them. Granted, none of these productions, as far as I can tell, required their hosts or other actors to wear PPE because, for the large part, they were alone on camera with no way to spread any possible contagion to other cast or crew. The response of late-night variety shows to the pandemic were one answer to what might have been common sense about their own productions. common sense might have been that their shows needed to be before live studio audiences in large studio settings with high tech. But that common sense was turned on its head by the constraints of the pandemic. And the results show that those pandemic constraints sparked creativity and innovation to make those productions continue forward. This means that there is now data. That data will help show whether economically the constraints of webcam productions of late-night variety shows worked, didn't work, or somewhere in between. The data may help in a comparative study between different late-night variety shows, which shows succeeded in their approaches during the pandemic, and which didn't work as well. These aren't questions I have, and data now may not be able to inform long-term projections, but the short answers seem to me to be that constraints on production because of COVID-19 can dispute and break, quote, common sense. And that can mean not only that productions can resume, but they can resume safely and successfully aligned with health and safety constraints. So then we turn back to actors. And let's say that local governments say that all employees must utilize PPE at all times. No exceptions. All employees must always wear PPE at all times. So on nearly all SAG-AFTRA productions, that would include actors, because they work as employees. That would mean that productions have a creative constraint ahead of them if they want to produce with actors during that kind of mandate. I mean, nothing is requiring productions to move forward at that time, except arguably contractual or logistical demands, but those probably would all be arguable during the pandemic anyway. So, what are some ways that productions can respond to a mandate that all employees, including actors, must always utilize PPE at all times? I'm not going to come up with all the answers. That's not the point. The point is to show that production can respond to the challenge of actors always having to wear PPE when they work. And here are some ideas. The first general idea that comes to mind is, well, if actors must always utilize PPE because that's the law, or really just because that's the way you best guarantee actor safety, then you don't put them on camera. That can mean any number of possible safe sub-ideas. The most obvious is to produce only using actors' voices. When actors only work as voiceover artists, this may mean that video game production, animation production, and audiobook production is safe work for actors when there's a PPE mandate. The same with commercials and television promos that only require a voiceover. So if you're not producing one of those, maybe see if it's that dire for you to move forward on producing with actors. Or maybe see if you can transform your production only to work using actors' voices. The second general idea when actors are mandated to always wear PPE is, well, have actors always in PPE, but never show their body parts that are covered in PPE. Does that mean you only shoot actors from the knees down? Do you only shoot actors from afar, where PPE wouldn't be seen? Do you always have actors in body-covering costumes? I don't have the answers. But sometimes you can have actors and shoot them, or part of them, if you really believe you really must move forward but can't shoot their PPE. Related to that idea is the more obvious. Have actors always in PPE, put them on camera, and figure out how to deal with showing the PPE. One response to that challenge is that maybe you develop green screen PPE, like a face mask for actors that is green screen, and then at a later date, superimpose the moving mouth. Probably a stupid idea, but maybe it's stupider to try to shoot actors without PPE and have a few actors die later. Of course, if actors must always wear PPE, another solution that makes sense is to only shoot productions in which the characters always wear PPE too. The production of, say, a TV series about a cast of characters in an ICU, especially during the time of the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, makes a lot of sense to have characters always in PPE, and thus the actors. In fact, any kind of medical drama might be best able to move forward with production while also having actors always in PPE. But what about productions where the characters wouldn't always be wearing PPE? That mainly brings us to the question of period pieces. Basically, any production that depicts a time before COVID-19 started changing what we saw people wearing in public life. If we have a period piece that takes place in, say, the 1850s, well, quote, common sense might dictate that, of course you can't have the actors in PPE for that. To that dangerous claim, I say, why not? What data do you have that won't work for the production? Why can't actors always wear PPE while shooting a period piece during a pandemic? And then I might add, if you insist actors can't always wear PPE, then why do you have to shoot now? It is for this reason I look to the experiments of the late-night variety shows. Remember, it might have been common sense not to produce their live studio audience shows from a home computer webcam, but experiments they did in moving forward to produce showed that they could produce shows under those constraints and people would still watch. So who's to say for certain that a period piece in the 1850s, with all the actors always wearing modern-day PPE, won't work or can't work without first experimenting with such a process, especially if local government is mandating all employees to always wear PPE. PPE is surely a hindrance, but not totally. Sure, it hinders disease progress, but it does not necessarily hinder creative progress. Heck, mask work is a style of acting even. If you've ever taken an acting class with mask work, where you try to do a scene wearing a mask, your performance changes. You become more physical and arguably more interesting. Why this happens is theoretically because the ability to express and communicate to others facially is completely paralyzed by the mask, except for what might be seen in the eyes. In fact, acting class mask work might be an indication of the kind of acting that might come from actors when they are trying to do their scenes while always wearing PPE. And who is to say that acting work can't be done unless we see the actors' faces without obstruction of their mouth, eyes, and overall face? Toward the beginning of the American pandemic, I wondered how on-camera journalists broadcasting from the field might navigate wearing or not wearing a mask, especially when some of the viewers may rely on the movements of the journalist's lips to understand them, which would be obscured when a mask is worn. I'm not sure of the results, but I've seen over time quite a number of journalists donning masks during the reports while they spoke. This is to say that they can do their jobs while wearing masks, and as journalists, they're arguably more important than actors, and some of these journalists could be in SAG-AFTRA. Did anyone ever claim that on-camera journalists can't always wear PPE? If there was that argument, and if that argument was thought of as common sense, it seems that both that argument and that common sense is so pre-pandemic. I say all of this because, while employer productions try to figure out what is right for their workplaces, and while unions try to figure out how they fit into protecting their members, I actually fear what that means for the individual worker going to an entertainment industry job upon the return to work. It might be that productions will care generally about the crew and about the cast, but when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, there might be conflicts of interest and biases that come to light and eventually put the employees at risk. Just look at the common sense that actors apparently can't always wear PPE. You'll see what kinds of chaos and paranoia at work that policy can promote. There might be hefty weight put on protecting the crew and educating them about safety procedures. But when it comes to day-playing actors and stand-ins, or rush-called actors or stand-ins with later report times, they may be left out of such safety education, especially if production resumed some time ago and the day player is just now arriving at the production. Then there is SAG-AFTRA, which many people will want to trust will do the right thing, whatever that will mean. But when it comes down to your own unique role on that special day you're working as SAG-AFTRA, will whatever protocols SAG-AFTRA and employers co-put in place protect you on that day at that very moment? If you're wearing a mask on set, and if someone in production asks you to take it off, and you refuse, what happens next? What if you object for obvious health and safety reasons? And what if you object for some other reason? What on earth do you do? My skepticism that SAG-AFTRA can respond completely for its actors upon the return to work, I think is reasonable. For one, currently, SAG-AFTRA has furloughed a number of staff, burdening those it didn't furlough with more responsibility. Plus, there are only so many field representatives who can come to set to monitor things. At that, the field reps aren't on set all day, with eyes on all aspects of production, including set, holdings, rehearsal, etc. There might be background in holding, stand-ins on set, and principal performers in the makeup chair. Not to mention, field reps are employees of SAG-AFTRA, but are in their own union. Field reps are Teamsters. Los Angeles reps are in Teamsters Local 986, and New York reps are in Teamsters Local 210. This fact means the Teamsters may have a say in how the SAG-AFTRA field reps safely do their jobs helping SAG-AFTRA members on set. Considering that SAG-AFTRA field reps bounce around from set to set during the day, they could be possible vectors of transmission from set to set to set in a single day. Put differently, they could possibly be at a greater risk of infection given the numbers of people they see in different geographic areas over a day. Generally speaking, SAG-AFTRA the employer can't unilaterally tell the field reps new policies. SAG-AFTRA the employer has to negotiate with the Teamsters before making changes to the reps' work conditions. And if the Teamsters put a safety block on SAG-AFTRA telling reps how to do their work now, the result could be that SAG-AFTRA members don't get the help on set they need. Admittedly, I don't know how realistic of an outcome that is, but it seems plausible enough to me for the Teamsters to consider the field reps and put the nix on any moves by SAG-AFTRA the employer to unilaterally change how the field reps do their work. I hope you see it as reasonable to be skeptical about the ability of SAG-AFTRA to truly protect its members and non-members when they are working amid the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. They promote safety, but they seem to also believe actors can't always wear PPE. They promote data, but make statements that aren't backed by data, which can have potentially dangerous consequences. And their furloughs and bargaining relationship with the Teamsters could put a strain on field reps or the SAG-AFTRA actors needing their assistance in contract administration and grievance adjustment. So, if it's reasonable to be skeptical about the ability of SAG-AFTRA to truly protect its members and non-members when they are working, what is the individual actor to do? What are you to do? Well, I'd like to point you to some tips, and then I want to let you know about some rights. First, the tips. These tips are something that I suggest you be proactive, even aggressive about doing or getting. Follow them now, and follow them before you get to work, or as soon as you get to work, because you don't want to be reactive, trying to follow these tips while also managing an onset crisis. My first tip is to pick up your smartphone right now. I want you to enter SAG-AFTRA's safety hotline right now into your phone's contact list. I said, right now. It's not enough that these numbers are on the SAG-AFTRA website in the little red box at the bottom of the screen, because you might be on set where there's no signal, so it may be impossible to get them. Or if you've given up your SAG-AFTRA card to someone in the props department, it's not as if that helps things for you. In your contacts, on your smartphone, right now, enter this number. 844-723-3773. That's the phone number for SAG-AFTRA Onset Emergencies. So now save that number in your phone. You know what? I'll repeat it, then give you a few moments. 844-723-3773. And that's for SAG-AFTRA Onset Emergencies. The next tip you might not be able to do right now when you're listening, but it's this. Make it a priority that for each SAG-AFTRA job you work on, ask for the phone number for the job's anonymous safety hotline at the time of booking. I hope this will become a matter of practice, where casting directors provide this information to SAG-AFTRA actors and stand-ins at the time of booking, because it just makes sense to do so, and it doesn't make sense not to do so. Now, failing that, If you are not given the production's anonymous safety hotline at the time of booking, hopefully it is in your check-in details. If it's not, then send an email to SAG-AFTRA right then and there. Send it to the contract rep for that production. Or, if you can't figure out who that is, send it to the general email account for your SAG-AFTRA local. If possible, screenshot or copy and paste the check-in information showing that production did not provide the anonymous safety hotline for the job, and include that note in your email to the union local office. The point of that is to document your efforts to procure that information for obvious reasons, safety, and to create a digital paper trail of your efforts to get anonymous safety hotline information for a production. These emails should help demonstrate to SAG-AFTRA any failings by a production to provide this information, as well as demonstrate that you were proactive in getting this important safety information. Now, let's say the anonymous safety hotline information has not been provided to you at booking by casting and it does not appear in your check-in information. Then, make it a point when you check in, either at a production or at a van taking you to a production, to get that anonymous safety hotline information. You can do that by, right when you arrive at the production or at the van taking you to set, asking for a call sheet or asking to see a call sheet, or simply asking for that anonymous safety hotline. That will help protect you as soon as possible should you be thrust into a safety situation on set or in a passenger van. Then photograph the number, or enter it into your phone, or keep the call sheet if you can. The overall point being that upon the return to work, have at the ready safety and emergency hotline numbers. Safety issues are sometimes not evident until after an accident happens. And by definition, emergencies are sudden, urgent, and without warning. So proactively having this information on hand is for your own safety. So those were 2 tips. Save SAG-AFTRA's Onset emergency hotline in your phone, and prioritize getting any production you're working on's anonymous safety hotline before you arrive at work or right when you're on the clock. Next, I want to talk about some rights you might not know you have as a union actor. What I like about reading and studying labor law is that it's as if you learn about the superpowers you have as an employee, but didn't know you had. It also helps you to understand what protections you have as an employee you didn't know you had, so you're not as vulnerable or weak as you thought you were when you work or talk to your union or your employer. It also helps to show you where you actually don't have superpowers you thought you had as an employee. The main resource for these rights is the National Labor Relations Act, which actually isn't that long or hard to read, and I encourage actors to read it or become familiar with it. I've linked to it in the show notes at actingincome.com/episode38, or you can pull it up on the National Labor Relations Board website at nlrb.gov. The National Labor Relations Act lays out clearly what your rights are as an employee in the private sector, which applies to the entertainment industry. Where it gets trickier to understand is the case law that rules on matters that test the laws. But that's for your later understanding. Knowing what's in the National Labor Relations Act is good enough for now. You won't regret taking 5 to maybe 20 minutes to read it. actingincome.com/episode38 or nlrb.gov. Now on to some important rights as you return back to work amid this coronavirus pandemic. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, so double check anything I say with someone more in the know, but let these comments serve as starting points. The first right for you to know as a SAG-AFTRA actor is with respect to retaliation. The National Labor Relations Board explains on its website that, quote, "It is illegal for an employer or union to retaliate against employees for filing charges or participating in NLRB investigations or proceedings." That is a lot of power and protection afforded to you as an actor. That means you can probably feel more emboldened than you thought, should your employer do something that doesn't sit right with the National Labor Relations Act, which I'll explain in a second. Or it also means you can feel probably more emboldened than you thought if your union should do something that doesn't sit right with the National Labor Relations Act. Generally speaking, it would be against the law for either the employer or the union to retaliate against you for filing a charge at the National Labor Relations Board. Here's what the National Labor Relations Act actually says. An important section to read and know is Section 7. If someone mentions your Section 7 rights, it's these. The National Labor Relations Act, in Section 7 says, quote, employees shall have the right to self-organization, to form, join, or assist labor organizations, to bargain collectively through representatives of their own choosing, and to engage in other concerted activities for the purpose of collective bargaining, or other mutual aid or protection. It also says that employees have the right, quote, to refrain from any and all such activities. Section 7 is pretty important because it lays down some of your fundamental rights when you are an actor working as an employee on a production. If you team up with another actor to pursue something on set, your concerted activity may be protected under the National Labor Relations Act. If you don't have another actor with whom to team up, but if your grievance is rooted in rights promised by your collective bargaining agreement or past practices, then your activity, even though it's solo, will also be protected by the National Labor Relations Doctrine known as the Interborough Doctrine. That's a bit in the weeds, but the main point is, it helps your case if you concert with another employee. But if you can't, and are by yourself asserting something in your collective bargaining agreement, then the law should protect your activities as concerted because of the NLRB's Interborough Doctrine. Then there's Section 8A1. That's a section related to employers and what actions they may take that are actually unfair labor practices that can get them in trouble with the law. Knowing these will help you better understand whether a production can or can't do that to you. Section 8A1 reads, quote, it shall be an unfair labor practice for an employer to interfere with, restrain, or coerce employees in the exercise of the rights guaranteed in Section 7. In short, if employers try to interfere, restrain, or coerce you and your fellow employees in your concerted attempts to gain mutual aid and protection, or attempts to engage in concerted activities, that can be a potential problem for the production if you go to the National Labor Relations Board and file a charge, or go to nlrb.gov and file a charge. Now, these laws are written very broadly, very generally, so case law ends up whittling down the details of when there is an actual breakage of these laws, or when, say, the employer's actions were founded. But the key thing to remember is, if you know you are protected from retaliation if you file an unfair labor practice charge with the NLRB, asserting your Section 7 right to concerted activity for mutual aid or protection, may be related to health and safety on set amid the coronavirus pandemic, your employer can't lawfully retaliate against you. Similarly, it may be helpful to know that it is unlawful for a union to discipline you for filing a charge with the NLRB against the union. Furthermore, it is unlawful for a union to interfere with your employment other than if you don't pay your initiation fee or appropriate amount of agency fees or dues. This is all to say, generally speaking, if you fear the union might retaliate against you for complaining about something legitimate, or might somehow keep you from working, you are protected, as long as you are paying your periodic dues or agency fees. Retaliation may still happen, but that does not make it lawful. And if it does happen, you may have a means to address it without costs at the NLRB. More on that later. So, the first point I wanted to make is that retaliation is generally unlawful under the NLRA, whether the retaliation is from the employer or from the union. The second point I wanted to make is your Weingarten Rights. You may have heard from SAG-AFTRA on occasion reminders about your Weingarten Rights, though they may have seemed more targeted at broadcasters and the like. Weingarten Rights apply to actors too. SAG-AFTRA, in one of its 2019 magazines, had a little card you could cut out that said this: know your rights. Don't let a meeting with management get out of hand. If you're called in to explain why something went wrong, stop and think about your Weingarten rights. By presenting this card to management, you may have the right to stop a meeting until your steward, assistant steward, or a union rep arrives to accompany you. The card shows the SAG-AFTRA logo, then says, if this discussion could in any way lead to my being disciplined, terminated, or affect my personal working conditions, I request that my shop steward or union officer be present at this meeting. until they arrive, as is my right under a U.S. Supreme Court decision called Weingarten, I choose not to answer any questions regarding this matter. Now, actors don't typically have shop stewards. So for actors, from what I can tell, this pretty much means having a union rep, like a field rep, or some other, quote, union official show up. Basically, Weingarten rights are these. If you're working as a union actor, and your employer wanted to do an investigatory meeting with you, wherein you feel you could face discipline, you can tell the employer that you will not answer any questions without the presence of a union representative. During the pandemic and the return to work, I can imagine Weingarten rights being important if you're an actor on a union set and refuse to do work for some reason, say health or safety reasons, and if someone from production wants to talk to you about why you were refusing. You do not need to answer with reasons why without the presence of union representation. You can request a union representative before answering any questions if you believe that answering such questions could affect your working conditions or employment status. What can follow from asserting your Weingarten rights are three options. 1. The employer can accept that demand, presumably meaning a union rep would have to show before any investigatory meeting with you can commence. 2. The employer can decide not to go any further with questioning you and leave it at that. Or 3. The employer can refuse your request for union representation and continue the questioning, which sets the bar for the employer committing an unfair labor practice if you file a charge at the National Labor Relations Board. Why Weingarten rights might be helpful for actors in the return to work is that asserting them can stall for time when you need to stand your ground and when production wants to ask you questions about your actions. Asserting your desire to have a union representative present means someone from SAG-AFTRA has to go out to production to be there for your meeting. If you're working late and you end up in a Weingarten situation, imagine what that might look like for you if SAG-AFTRA is closed or a union rep is not available to go out. Now, asserting these rights are only helpful if you truly believe that your meeting with your employer could yield disciplinary action against you. If you don't believe that's the case, or if you have assurance that no discipline will ensue from such a meeting, you probably will not have standing to assert Weingarten rights. But if you do believe that, say, production wants to ask you questions why you're refusing to work, and that answering such questions may set you up for being fired, then you may have proper standing for asserting your rights. Asserting such rights may also be helpful in watching any consequences of standing such ground, such as if you are let go later in an arguable act of unlawful retaliation. I say all of this because, let's say the production is shooting late, and SAG-AFTRA's offices are closed, and things just seem lax and rushed on set, and you're seeing shortcomings in health and safety protocols. So you refuse to work. Someone from production may come to you and ask why you won't work. At that point, you aren't required to explain yourself if you believe it could affect your working conditions. Instead, you can say that you'll answer that question in the presence of a union representative or presumptively show them that SAG-AFTRA Weingarten card. Now, it's late and SAG-AFTRA is closed, so the likelihood of a union rep showing up is probably a long shot. And if you're day playing, meaning you're probably not coming back tomorrow, I have no idea what Weingarten would look like after then. But if you assert your Weingarten rights, you set yourself up for some protection. And you also set yourself up for a measure of whether you might subsequently be the recipient of unlawful retaliation. I hope it's more that you catch my drift than to follow this advice verbatim. Again, I'm not a lawyer. And speaking of lawyers, one last thing. Lawyers are arguably expensive. But know this. If you file a charge against an employer or a union with the National Labor Relations Board, it won't cost you a thing, other than maybe a stamp and maybe a day or two of work, depending on your case. You may end up with representation from the NLRB, and that is not something you pay for. Granted, you can hire your own lawyer if you file a charge and have that lawyer represent you, but you don't have to. That should make you feel more emboldened to do something about potential violations you experience of the National Labor Relations Act and your Section 7 rights in the return to work. You shouldn't expect it to cost anything. So, for this long episode, I want to recap my points. If SAG-AFTRA's interest is actor safety, and if SAG-AFTRA's interest is in data, then SAG-AFTRA should not promote claims like actors cannot always wear PPE when they work, because such a claim is not backed by data, and such a claim lays down groundwork for actors to work in unsafe conditions. Remember, actors can die. Those actors have family. Those actors can infect family members. And those family members can die. Instead, for now, SAG-AFTRA should promote a safer cause, that actors can always wear PPE when they work. And there is plenty of data during this pandemic to back up that under the pandemic's creative constraints, productions can work in a way to protect all of its employees. But I'm sure there will be failings, and there will be times when individual actors feel unsafe, times when you feel unsafe. So first, now, you should enter SAG-AFTRA's Onset Emergencies Hotline into your phone. I'll repeat the number for you now, in case you still haven't entered it. That number is 844-723-3773. Then, you should prioritize getting a production's anonymous safety hotline information. And when it's not given to you, you should document such failures to the SAG-AFTRA local. Then you should make a beeline when you show up at a production or at a van to get that anonymous safety hotline. Other ways to protect yourself as an individual actor navigating this pandemic are to know your rights under the National Labor Relations Act. There are protections for you against retaliation by your employer and by your union. And if you believe your employer may be trying to ask you questions that could affect your working conditions or employment status, you can assert your Weingarten rights and not answer any questions until a union rep shows. And this may be especially important during the pandemic, in the event that you concert your activity for mutual aid or protection. I hope you'll share this episode with other actors and recommend they listen to this episode. It would be nice to return to work and learn that other actors know these opinions, these tips, and this advice, and how to protect themselves. Employers and the unions can only do so much. And this is the entertainment industry, so theoretically, everything can happen, and not every situation can be addressed. But remember, during the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, people came down with COVID-19. Over 100,000 people died. You could end up one of them. You may not be an essential worker for me, but you're definitely an essential worker for yourself. This episode was sponsored by Stand-In Central. To read in-depth information about how the coronavirus pandemic is affecting and is predicted to affect stand-ins, visit standincentral.com/coronavirus. That's standincentral.com/coronavirus. The show notes for this episode are available at actingincome.com/episode38, where you can also leave a comment on this episode. You can also find Acting Income on Twitter and Facebook. Have a story idea? Shoot me an email at actingincome.com/pitch. And be sure to click the subscribe button on your favorite podcasts app to get new episodes as they're released. I'm Ben Houck. Stay tuned for next time. And for more information, as always, check out actingincome.com.